podcast in between regular podcasts because I wanted to respond to Frank Rusak talking about Shannon Watts and the girls and the Rusak family being bullied. And it's something that I said on the last podcast I was going to talk about on the Chris Watts podcast, but I decided that I was going to do this instead. So bear with me. Hang on to your hats. You're going to hear the mean lady get really mean. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Welcome to the Mean Lady Talking Podcast. This is the podcast that tackles tough questions about relationships, life, love, and loss. It may not be the advice you want, but is probably the advice you need. And now here's your host, grief therapist, motivational speaker, relationship expert, best-selling author, and attorney, the not really mean lady herself, Susan J. Elliott.
Good day, everybody. This is Susan Elliott, host of Mean Lady Talking Podcast, and welcome to a bit of a mini episode. This isn't a mini episode. A mini episode are the weekly mini episodes that I give out to my meanies, who are major meanies and mega meanies. I said in my last podcast that I was working on a Chris Watts follow-up because the last series that I did was on personality disorders. I talked about him because there had been a lot of misinformation. And on the preview of what the next Chris Watts thing was going to be, I talked about the victim blaming with Shanann Watts. And I linked to a previous episode that I had done where I talked about the victim blaming. And I was going to roll this into part of the Chris Watts follow-up. But Frank Rusak, Shanann Watts' father, actually went to Colorado and had a press conference asking people to stop harassing his family. That there were bullying and there were obscene things being said. And he said that he had reported it to Twitter and Facebook and nothing was done. And he's calling on Congress to do something about victim families being harassed on the internet. And we saw some of this in other cases. We saw it with the Alexander family and the Jodi Arias, that there were people definitely taunting and bullying the Alexander family. The Rusak family not only lost their daughter, they lost their granddaughters and their future grandson. That is a huge amount of loss in 1 year. It's been a year since the murders. Leave this family alone. And those of you who are speculating about, let's talk about suppose Chris had brought this to trial, what would people think? Would people think that Shanann was abusive and mentally ill and that she drove him to murder? No. Chris was out romping in the woods for weeks with Nicole Kessinger. He was having the time of his life before he killed Shanann. He was living it up like a rock star before he killed her. And why did he kill the girls? She didn't drive him crazy. She wasn't even home. She had been away from him for 6 weeks. And then she went on a business trip. She wasn't even home. She didn't drive him crazy. And people talk about, what if at trial they introduced the text where she said to Chris, those kids are never stepping in the grandparents' home again. There is not a person on earth that hasn't had kids where one set of grandparents does something that the other parent doesn't like. And usually what happens, I had a controlling, abusive husband, and yet he would scream about the way my mother treated the kids, and I would scream about the way his mother treated the kids. It went back and forth. She took those kids for all those weeks to North Carolina while Chris was frolicking with his mistress. She was pregnant. She was stressed out. And his family gave the kids something they shouldn't have given him, and Shanann thought that it was done on purpose. And she was angry about it. And if they were in a normal marriage, if he wasn't carrying on and, being a little more forceful, he would have said, okay, I'll talk to them and we'll make sure it doesn't happen. That's how marriages work. That's how it works out. You don't get to murder somebody because they send you a text saying, if your parents continue to give the children things that they're allergic to, they're never stepping in that house again. No, what happens is, okay, let me talk to my parents. I'll advise them that it's not a good idea. Whether or not they believe the kids are really allergic to it, it doesn't matter. It's none of their business. They're not in charge of those kids. And anybody who said she had Munchausen by proxy is completely out of their damn mind. She was not mentally ill. And anybody who wants to speculate on if Chris Watts brought this to trial, he might win, blah, blah, blah. No, he dumped his daughters in an oil tank. His beautiful, precious daughters. His wife is not responsible for that. Only a monster does that. He was hoping that those kids would never be found. Those beautiful, precious, lovely girls would never be found. And those poor rescuers who had to go in there and pull those girls out, they had to be treated afterwards because that material is so hazardous. And the next 2 minutes, I'm going to describe the condition of the girl's body. So if you are sensitive at all, please fast forward at least 2 minutes. When they pulled those girls out of that well, their skin was coming off. This is what this guy did, disposed of those precious little girls. And can you imagine, no matter how tough a guy you are, to be trained in that kind of recovery and to have to pull those precious little girls out of there in that condition? Can you imagine? And then you have to be going through all kinds of decontamination to make sure that you're not going to get cancer in the next 10 years. It's disgusting what he did. And there's no amount of nagging in the world that is going to justify any of that. I've heard people on YouTube say, oh, people are saying terrible things about Chris Watts. Gee, I don't know why. He murdered his pregnant wife, knowing that she was carrying the son that he said he always wanted. But okay, it's like Scott Peterson killed Lacey Peterson. And people could say he was a monster and he acted like a lunatic and he had Amber Fry and the whole 9 yards. And he's on death row. But Scott Peterson didn't kill any live kids that had jumped on his lap and called him daddy and saying daddy is a hero to him. He didn't kill a child like that, like Bella, who sat there and sang, my daddy is a hero. Scott Peterson didn't kill that little girl. Chris Watts killed that little girl and dumped her body. And not only did he kill that precious little girl, but she knew he killed her mother. She watched him kill her sister and knew he was coming for her. Those were the last terrifying moments of that little girl's life. And there's nothing in this world that you can say that will make me or any sane person think, oh, a jury was going to hear all this and go, oh, yeah, well, that's all Shannon's fault. All Shannon's fault. It's bullshit. Anybody who wants to blame the victim is out of their damn mind. And I don't care how many hypothetical jury trials you want to go through in your freaking stupid head. The people who are talking about this don't even understand the rules of evidence. Maybe you should try going hypothetically through a criminal trial where actually some of these things would be brought in for, what, relevance? You're going to prove to a jury that Shanann, by sending texts to a guy who's off romping with his mistress and having the time of his life and going, looking good, baby, that she drove him crazy? You think a jury is going to buy that? I'm a therapist and I'm a lawyer. And half the shit that I heard about, oh, imagine this, imagine that shit would never be getting into a jury trial. So maybe you should study jury trials before you start spouting off. Imagine if a jury saw this. A jury would never see that. Just like a jury in the Jodi Arias trial never got to see that Travis Alexander thought that it was Jodi Arias to slash his tire. That stuff never came in. Relevance and hearsay, it never came in. And the people out there that are talking about Shanann Watts are the same people that are accusing other people of doing Watts family murder stuff for cash flow. Now, I talked about this on the last podcast, and I said the reason I didn't want to jump into this fray was for that very reason, that there are people that are getting views on YouTube only because they're talking about Chris Watts. Only because they're talking about Chris Watts. And I did not want my podcast to ever just be about Chris Watts. I wanted to inform my listeners about personality disorders, about lupus, about victim blaming, about all this other stuff. I didn't want to make it just about Chris Watts or just about Shannon Watts. I wanted to make it about something my listeners could actually use in their own life. And most of that is about personality disorders. Because people are going around saying that Shannon Watts was mentally ill and maybe she had Munchausen syndrome and maybe she drove Chris to murder, maybe she drove him crazy, that's the reason why the Ruseks are being bullied and harassed and terrible things being said about their dead daughter. Give it a break. It's none of your business. The woman is dead. She was 15 weeks pregnant with a little boy. And her beautiful daughters are also dead. And they're dead because the monster husband father killed them. Not because Shannon drove him crazy. She left him alone in Colorado. He had all the time in the world to just frolic in the sand with Nicole Kessinger. And even when she came home from North Carolina, she went out to a business trip. How the hell is she driving him crazy? How the hell is she making him insane? She's not even there. And if she's arguing with him from North Carolina because his family is giving the kids stuff they shouldn't have given, maybe the family shouldn't have given them stuff. And I'm sorry, but everybody has those "your parents did this" arguments. And you don't get to kill your spouse because of that. You just don't. Anyone who thinks that Chris Watts would have done better at a trial is out of their minds. You show autopsy photos of those girls to a jury because that's what would be coming in, not those stupid texts. The state would be screaming about the relevance of those texts. I'd be like, well, what the hell? You're not going to prove that he went insane. It would never, ever, ever be a defense. He's not criminally insane. He's not. It's a very, very high burden, and he wouldn't meet it. He was very lucid. He was very clear. And if he has autism, autism is not a defense. You're not insane if you have autism. You might be easily manipulated. You might want to give somebody might want to get somebody's approval. Maybe he wanted Nicole Kessinger's approval, but none of that stuff has been talked about. All of that is pure speculation. Nobody knows. He's not been diagnosed as autistic, and people that can see him and say, oh yeah, he's autistic, that still doesn't give him the right to kill his wife and children. He doesn't give him the right. And it shouldn't make a difference. So none of that stuff is going to come in. So if I wanted to do a hypothetical trial, as an attorney who actually knows the rules of evidence, knows what would come in and what wouldn't come in, I would say exactly what happened. You better take a plea, buddy, because otherwise you're going to the death chamber. That's where you're going. There is no way on the face of this earth that Chris Watts would prevail at trial, that any outcome would be better than the one he got. He would get life without parole or the death penalty. One or the other. He wouldn't do any better at trial. You can hypothetical that shit until the freaking cows come home, and it's not going to change things. All the jury has to see is the autopsy photos of those girls, and it's all she wrote. Do you think he's stupid? He's not stupid. He took that plea because he knew that if he ever took his chances at trial, he was going to lose and lose badly. And the people that are talking about this are just drumming this stuff up. And just as I will on the Jodi Arias thing, I will talk about people who harass defense attorneys because I think that's despicable. And I'm going to talk about that on the Jodi Arias podcast, that defense attorneys do a job that needs to be done. We all have a constitutional right in this country to an attorney. And if there weren't attorneys who did public defense work and you were accused of a crime, whether you admitted it or not, you will thank your lucky stars that there are defense attorneys that will do it for the public interest. And don't think that, oh, well, they're a public defender, so they're not, they're probably not very good at their job. No, you have to be very good to do public interest work. And that is a fallacy that people, for some reason, believe. Public interest work is not easy to get into. It's not easy to be a public defender. It's not easy to be a prosecutor. It's not easy to go and work for a public interest place like a domestic violence organization or something. You have to be very good. You have to have good grades. You have to be doing the work. You have to do good internship. They don't give those jobs to dummies. They don't give those jobs to the bottom of the barrel. All of the people that do public interest work could be working at top law firms, but instead they take the lesser money and they go into public interest. And I admire them. Because if I didn't have a full family to support, I would have gone into public interest work, but I couldn't afford it. You have to be very dedicated to public interest work to be a public defender. And everybody in this country who's accused of a crime needs a public defender if they don't have the money for a private attorney. And if you get to be a capital public defender, like Curt Nurmi and Jennifer Wilmot, you are at the top of the heap. You really are. And I had problems with Nurmi. I had problems with the way he talked. I had problems with his pronunciation of words. But he's not stupid. I was watching something because I'm doing the Appeal podcast. I was watching something he did the other day, and I was like, he really knows his shit. Fortunately, he took a disbarment rather than take a 4-year suspension because Arias is suing him. But watching things, because I couldn't remember something that happened at the trial, and I wanted to comment on it, and I went back and I looked at it, and I was really impressed with it. It was one of the evidentiary hearings when the jury was out of the room. He seemed to talk a little faster when the juries weren't there. And I was listening to him, and I was like, he really knows his shit. But you have to be at the top of your game to be a criminal defense attorney and to be a capital when your client's life is on the line, and he saved Jodi Arias's ass, whether or not she believes it or is grateful, because she's a personality disordered lunatic. So, of course, she's not going to be grateful. And she managed to ruin the man, or try to ruin the man. But he knows what he's doing. And if you were accused of capital murder, you would want an attorney of Curt Nurmi's stature and Jennifer Wilmot's stature. And yes, all their sidebars drove me crazy and all their objections drove me crazy. But you know what it did? It preserved issues on appeal for Arias. That's what it did. Some of their objections are making the appeal, are really making the state work in the appeal. And I've been with the briefs for weeks now, reading them every night, looking up the cases that they're talking about, going back, reviewing the trial videos. And I can tell you that the objections that Nurmi and Wilmot made at trial are making the state's job harder in the appeal. I think it's disgusting for people to have sent death threats to defense attorneys who are just doing their job. It's disgusting. And if they hadn't done their job, Arias might have an ineffective assistance of counsel claim at appeal, and she doesn't. She doesn't have that because they were very effective. So if you are an opponent of Jodi Arias, which I am, you should be a fan of Nurmi and Wilmot because they took away ineffective assistance of counsel. And what she's suing Nurmi for is a breach of client confidentiality, not ineffective assistance. That would go in the appeal brief, and it's not there because they did a good job. And the fact that they were getting death threats and people were posting false things about Jennifer Wilmot, saying she had an arrest for marijuana, that's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And people wishing bad things on them, saying that Nurmi's cancer, is him being punished for defending Jodi Arias. He had a job to do, and he did it well. And if you murder someone or you're accused of murdering someone, you will wish to God you had someone like Curt Nurmi and Jennifer Wilmot on your side. Honest to God, you would. So I think it's disgusting for people to threaten, malign, harass, bully, insult defense attorneys. I think it's disgusting. We all have a right to it, and that is a very gifted profession, and it's very underappreciated. And people should thank their lucky stars. There are good defense attorneys who do public interest work. And if you ever get in trouble or you're ever accused of something, you will thank your lucky stars. So just like I don't believe that people should malign, bully, harass, harangue, threaten, defense attorneys, they certainly shouldn't do it to victim families. They certainly shouldn't do it to a family that lost their daughter and their granddaughter. And whether they got life insurance or anything else is none of your damn business. And I am sure I have been a grief therapist for 25 years, and I can tell you that every single family I ever worked with, where there has been a death, and I can say it with my husband too, if you got insurance money, you would give all of that back and more to have that loved one back. Don't give me this bullshit about the Ruseks got life insurance and all this other stuff. They would gladly give all that money back to have Shannon and the girls and Nico back. They would gladly do it. All of this online harassment is bullshit. Absolute bullshit. Whether it's a defense attorney or whether it's a victim's family, it's absolute bullshit. And I want Frank Rusek to know that I support him in his idea that some law should be passed to make it a crime to bully victims' families. They really should be a crime, but it also should be a crime to threaten defense attorneys. And the people who do it, and I notice, like, you can see me, I'm out there, my name is out there. All these people who are talking about Shannon Watts are doing so, most of them under the cloak of some online persona. They're not using their real name, and they're all accusing each other of doing this for cash cow purposes. They're all a bunch of cowards. All a bunch of cowards. Show your face or don't show your face. There are crazy people that have shown their face in this whole brouhaha, but don't not show your face and then talk all this shit, because I would talk a lot more shit if I wasn't showing my face. Somebody said, do you think that Chris Watts should be in prison? Yes, Chris Watts should be in prison. He killed his pregnant wife and 2 daughters. Are you serious about that question? And now that somebody has put up, oh, let's think about what would happen in trial, I might actually take that on in one of the Chris Watts things. But again, I want to inform my listeners. I don't want to, like I said, I didn't do the Nicole Kessinger. I didn't release the Nicole Kessinger podcast that I recorded because I was just going off on her. And I was like, okay, well, this isn't really telling my listeners anything. So I want to get to a place where I am informing it. So I'm still working on that. I have more stuff about personality disorders. Now I've thrown in the autistic stuff. I will talk a little bit more about the victim blaming. I'm sure more crap is going to come out, but I think it's absolutely disgusting. And the people who are insinuating that Shannon Watts has a mental illness, you have no clue about that. And trust me, therapists and psychologists and psychology professionals, we talk about this stuff all the time. There was somebody on the Jodi Arias tag who was always on me about you didn't interview Arias, you can't say what she has. No, bullshit. People do it all the time, and I do it, and I did it, and I'm going to continue to do it. There's absolutely zero evidence that Shannon Watts had any mental illness. Any accusation of Munhashim by proxy is total and complete bullshit. Because the girls had allergies? Were you kidding me? Give me a break. Just give me a break. Anything that you have said, and somebody said a long time ago that I'm a fool if I couldn't see that she's a liar. No, you're a fool if you think she's a liar. You have absolutely zero proof that she lied about anything. And any of these little domestic things that you're going to try to come up with to show that she was like driving Chris crazy. Nobody is that fragile. He was not that fragile. Anybody who's carrying on an affair and a marriage at the same time and keeping it a secret as long as he did is not fragile. She did not cause her own murder. Stop victim blaming. It's bullshit. And it's what's been done to women the entire history of the world. Knock it off. Anybody who is a fan of Chris Watts is out of their friggin' mind, or they're as stupid as the day is long. And I'm on record as saying that. The man is a monster. He killed those little girls. And there is nothing that Shanann or anybody else in the world could have done to make him do that. Even Nicole Kessinger, she did not manipulate him. She did not influence him. If he was stupid enough to be influenced because maybe she didn't want kids or he thought he was going to be free to be with her, whatever the hell stupid thing he was thinking. It was still his responsibility. He still killed those little girls. Anybody who puts some chickadee before their children is a clear and destructive, horrible person. So let's knock it off with the victim blaming and leave the Rusak family alone. Okay, this is not my regular podcast this week. This is just me spouting off, losing my mind. I will get you the relationship regular podcast. I'm working on mini podcasts too for my meanies. And I'll talk to you guys all soon. Talk to you later, guys. Bye-bye.